The silence of space was suddenly broken. General Drix stood at the helm of the Arcturian flagship, staring at the vast darkness outside. His fleet, a massive armada of sleek ships, had been patrolling the edge of the sector for weeks, ensuring the safety of their empire. But something was off today. A strange blip appeared on his sensor screens, a signal that wasn't supposed to be there. "Commander, what is that?" Drix asked, his voice calm but his brow furrowed in concern. The commander at the sensor station quickly ran calculations, her fingers flying over the controls. It's not from any known species, General. The readings are off the charts." Drix's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer to the screen. The mysterious object was enormous, almost as large as their flagship. It was moving at a speed that no ship should be able to reach. Yet there was no sound, no energy readings, no indication of what it was or where it came from. Could it be a malfunction? Drix asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir. It's too precise. It's approaching us. Fast," the commander replied, her voice now edged with uncertainty. The strange object wasn't just showing up on their scanners. It was getting closer. The fleet's defensive systems began to come online, and Drix's hand instinctively hovered over the controls, preparing for the worst. "We need to know what this is, General," said Commander Jen, the head of their fleet's special forces. "If it's a threat, we need to strike first." Drix hesitated. His experience told him that caution was always the best route, but something about this situation felt different. The ship moved like it was in no hurry, as if it knew exactly where it was going. And it wasn't communicating. No radio signals, no messages, just silence. "Send out a recon ship," Drix ordered, his voice firm. "Get close enough to get a visual. I don't care if it's a risk. I need to know what this is." The command was given, and a small scout ship shot off toward the unknown vessel, its engines blazing through space. On the flagship, Drix and his crew watched as the scout ship closed the distance, the enormous shadow of the mysterious ship growing larger on the screens. "Keep an eye on that ship. Whatever it is, it's not showing up on any of our databases. Make sure we don't miss anything," Drix said. Minutes felt like hours as the scout ship approached. The crew held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. The vastness of space felt oppressive, as if the ship had already drawn them into a trap. Then, just as the scout ship got within range, the unknown warship did something unexpected. It sent out a pulse of energy that completely disabled the scout ship's systems. All the lights on the ship flickered out. The comms went dead. It was as if the unknown vessel had reached out and grabbed the scout ship from a distance. Drix clenched his fists. What the hell was that? The commander's voice was filled with fear. "General, the ship's gone. We've lost all contact. The recon ship is disabled. It's like the ship just erased it." The fleet was now on high alert. The unknown warship was still coming, but now it was even closer. Its intentions were unclear, and the Arcturian fleet, for the first time in years, was at a loss. Drix stood, staring at the unknown vessel as it loomed closer. He could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever this was, it was not something they had ever encountered before. "Prepare the fleet. If this ship means us harm, we'll make sure it regrets the day it entered our sector." The unknown warship, without a sound, continued its slow approach, as if it knew no one could stop it, and General Drix could only wonder. What was this ship? And who or what was aboard? The galaxy was about to face something it had never seen before. The atmosphere aboard the Arcturian flagship was tense. General Drix stood at the command center, his gaze fixed on the enormous unknown warship drawing nearer. The crew, once confident in their strength and dominance, now seemed on edge, their eyes darting nervously between their consoles and the imposing figure on the display. "Report, Commander," Drix demanded, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. He had been in battles before, but this felt different. The commander at the sensor station was rapidly scanning, her face pale. "Sir, all attempts to contact the vessel are being blocked. It's not responding to any frequency we've used. It's as if it doesn't even recognize us." "Impossible," Drix muttered, his fingers tightening on the edge of his command chair. "How can something that advanced not respond?" Commander Zhen, who had been observing quietly from the side, now stepped forward. "General, we can't let this ship get any closer. If it's hostile, we need to strike now while we still have the advantage." Drix turned his head slowly toward Zhen, considering the suggestion. Striking first was always the most effective tactic, but something in his gut told him that acting out of panic could backfire. This wasn't just another ship. There was something profoundly unsettling about the way it moved through space, silent, deliberate, and almost aware. "We'll give it one more chance. Send a fleet of drones for visual confirmation," Drix ordered, his voice steely. "We need to see it with our own eyes before we make any decisions." The drones were launched, small, nimble vessels designed for reconnaissance. They scattered through the darkness of space, approaching the mysterious ship from different angles. As they drew closer, the eerie stillness grew even more pronounced. No signs of weapons, no energy signatures, just an endless void surrounding the ship. Then one of the drones transmitted a live feed back to the flagship. The crew gathered around the main screen, watching in stunned silence. The warship was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Its surface was a dark, metallic sheen, smooth with no visible markings or insignia. It wasn't just big, it was massive, larger than any ship in the Arcturian fleet, yet it didn't seem to have any conventional weapons, like plasma turrets or laser cannons. There were no engines visible, and yet it moved through space effortlessly. It was as if it existed outside the normal rules of physics. "Get me a closer view," Drix ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the feed. He was drawn to the ship, fascinated by its presence, but also terrified by the sheer unknown. The drones maneuvered closer. Just as they reached what seemed to be the ship's core, a sudden, piercing flash of light exploded from the ship's surface. The drones were instantly disintegrated, reduced to nothing more than debris floating in space. "Report," Drix barked. We lost all drones, General." "They were destroyed in an instant," the officer at the sensor station reported, his voice shaky. "Whatever it is, it's not just defensive. It's actively blocking us." Drix's jaw clenched. This was no ordinary ship. There was something deliberate about its movements, as if it had no fear of the Arcturian fleet. It was as if the ship knew no one could challenge it. Without warning, the warship sent out a pulse of energy. This time, it wasn't directed at any of their ships, but it rattled the Arcturian fleet's systems. Lights flickered, and several systems temporarily shut down, only to reboot moments later. "That wasn't just a warning shot," said Zhen, his voice low. "It's testing us." The crew looked at each other nervously. The power of the pulse was staggering. If the warship had wanted to destroy them, it could have done so in an instant. But it didn't. It was playing a game with them, testing their reactions, studying their weaknesses. Drix exhaled slowly, feeling a heavy weight on his chest. He was no fool. This wasn't about power, it was about something more. The warship wasn't here to destroy them. It was here to make them fear it. And in doing so, it had already succeeded. "This is no ordinary warship," Drix finally spoke, his voice firm. "It knows exactly what it's doing. It's not just here to fight. It's here to send a message." The silence in the room was deafening. The galaxy's greatest empire was being outplayed by an unknown force. And the worst part was, no one had any idea who was behind it or what they wanted. The warship was close now, too close for comfort. Whatever its purpose, it was about to make its move. Drix turned to his officers, his expression hardening. "Prepare for battle stations. We might not know what it is, but we'll face it head on. Get our best minds on it. This warship has a purpose, and I intend to find out what it is. The warship hovered just outside the Arcturian fleet's defensive perimeter. Its presence was like a dark cloud looming over the ships. The silence was unnerving. General Drix stood at the command center, his hands clenched into fists. The crew worked in a feverish pace, trying to make sense of the alien ship's every move. But there was no pattern, no sign of intent, just an ever-increasing sense of danger. "General, we've received something," Commander Zhen said, breaking the silence. "A transmission from the warship." Drix turned sharply, his heart pounding. What kind of transmission? The officer at the communication station was frantically trying to decode the signal. "It's strange. There's no language we recognize, no code or standard message. But it's definitely directed at us." The crew fell silent, waiting for the message to be fully processed. Finally, a series of strange symbols appeared on the main screen. They were unlike anything the Arcturians had ever seen, swirling in patterns that seemed to dance across the screen. "This doesn't make sense," Zhen muttered. "It's not even a language. It's more like a pattern. A signal we can't comprehend." The room was tense. No one had seen anything like this. The Arcturians had encountered countless species in their time, each with their own ways of communication, but this was something entirely different. There was a strange energy to the symbols, something almost alive about them, as if they were trying to reach into their minds and force comprehension. "Keep working on it," Drix ordered. "We need to understand this. If we're going to face whatever this ship is, we have to know what it wants." The communications officer nodded, continuing to analyze the patterns, but it was clear they were in uncharted territory. Meanwhile, aboard the warship. Inside the colossal warship, the crew was a blur of motion. Unlike the Arcturians, who were composed of a mix of organic and synthetic beings, the crew of the unknown ship was entirely different. They were humanoid in shape, but their features were obscured by dark, sleek armor. No eyes, no faces, just cold, emotionless figures standing in perfect formation. The interior of the ship was vast, almost cathedral-like, with smooth, flowing walls that seemed to pulse with life. The air inside felt thick, as if the ship itself was alive and aware of its surroundings. At the very center of the warship, in a chamber bathed in an eerie glow, stood a figure, tall, imposing, and shrouded in shadow. The figure stepped forward. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the chamber. "They are weak, but they will learn." The being reached out with one hand, and the ship responded, releasing a burst of energy into the communications array. The strange symbols were sent out into space once more, but this time, something was different. A deep, almost guttural sound accompanied the transmission. An ancient voice, speaking in a language that no one in the galaxy could understand. But the voice was clear. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a statement. "We are the fallen. We have seen your kind before. We will see you again. Prepare yourselves." Back on the flagship, the transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence behind. General Drix stared at the screen, his mind racing. The message had been incomprehensible at first, but now, in the quiet aftermath, it echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat. "What does it mean?" Drix muttered to himself. "General, we've analyzed the signal as much as we can," Commander Zhen said. "There's something strange about it. The language, the symbols, they don't fit any pattern we've ever encountered. But what I can tell you is this: it's not just a warning. It's a declaration. They've come here before." A cold chill ran down Drix's spine. "Before? How do you mean?" "The Fallen," Zhen said slowly. "It's an ancient name. One that appears in the oldest texts we've recovered, scattered through several galactic sectors. But there's nothing concrete. It's as if no one knows for sure who they were or what happened to them." Drix clenched his jaw. "But if they've been here before, then we're dealing with something far older and more powerful than we can imagine." The crew exchanged worried glances. The Arcturian Empire was vast and powerful, but they were not used to facing an enemy they knew nothing about. An enemy who had already been in this galaxy once, perhaps long before the Arcturians had even risen to prominence. "General, what do we do now?" Commander Gen asked, his voice filled with both fear and determination. Drix stood silently for a moment, his eyes fixed on the blackness of space beyond the warship. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Whatever this warship was, it had come for a reason, and it was now looking directly at them. "We prepare for the worst," Drix said, his voice grim. "We don't know what these Fallen are capable of, but we'll find out. We've survived wars before, but this one feels different." He turned to his communications officer. "Send out a general distress signal. We need reinforcements, but keep the message limited. Don't reveal everything we've learned. If there's even a chance that the Fallen are who we think they are, we'll need every ship we can get." The officer nodded, sending the signal out into the vastness of space. The fleet was on high alert, but the uncertainty of what was to come loomed over them like a shadow. As the warship hovered just outside their reach, General Drix couldn't help but feel the weight of those final words. "Prepare yourselves." The galaxy, it seemed, was about to face a storm it was not ready for, and the Arcturians might be the first to feel its wrath. The silence that had followed the transmission from the mysterious warship was unbearable. General Drix stood on the bridge of the Arcturian flagship, staring at the starry expanse of space outside. His mind raced. The Fallen. That name lingered in his thoughts like a dark omen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. "General, we've received a response from the High Command," Commander Gen said, stepping forward. "They're sending reinforcements as requested. A full battle fleet, including the warships from the Verant sector. It'll take them at least 12 hours to get here." Drix nodded, but the news did little to ease his growing anxiety. 12 hours. That was a lifetime in a situation like this. And if the Fallen were as old and powerful as the text suggested, every minute they waited could be another minute they didn't have. "We don't have 12 hours, Drix muttered, more to himself than to anyone in particular. "We need to find out what they want, and fast. What could an enemy this old want with us?" Gen raised an eyebrow. "Maybe they think we're weak. It's possible they've been watching us, waiting for a chance to strike." Drix shook his head. "No, this is more than that. The Fallen don't strike randomly. They must have a purpose, and I don't believe it's just to conquer. It's something else." The Arcturian fleet had been the dominant force in this part of the galaxy for centuries. But now, they were faced with an unknown enemy that seemed not only more powerful but far older. Drix could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future of the galaxy itself. Meanwhile, aboard the Fallen warship, the crew of the Fallen warship moved with cold, calculated precision. Their faces were obscured behind featureless helmets, their movements synchronized as though they were one single entity, driven by a singular purpose. The chamber where the leader stood was bathed in an unnatural light, and at the heart of the room stood a massive projection screen, showing the Arcturian fleet in real time. The leader of the Fallen, a tall, imposing figure clad in dark, polished armor, stared at the screen. Its voice was low, reverberating through the ship. "They are weak. They know nothing of us. But soon they will learn." A figure clad in similarly dark armor stepped forward, its voice devoid of emotion. "We have monitored their empire for centuries. They are but a fledgling species. Their arrogance blinds them." "Then let them be blinded," the leader responded coldly. "The galaxy has long forgotten the lessons we taught them. It's time they remember." The leader stepped forward, raising a hand. A series of holographic images flickered to life in the air, showing images of the Arcturian fleet, their ships bristling with weapons. But there was one image that stood out, a fleet of human warships, moving silently through space. "They will not stop us. The humans will not be caught off guard again. We will teach them that the price of ignoring the past is destruction, the leader said. The crew around them stood still, waiting for the command. We will show them how quickly the galaxy can be torn apart. Back on the Arcturian flagship, the Arcturian fleet was on high alert. Drix stood at the helm, watching as the mysterious warship continued its slow advance. The unknown ship had not moved since the last transmission, but that didn't mean it was harmless. It was like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We've received another transmission, General, the communications officer reported, her voice tense. Drix didn't even need to ask. The officer quickly brought up the feed. The screen flashed again, showing the strange symbols, this time accompanied by the same deep, rumbling voice they had heard earlier. But this time, there was something new. A figure appeared on the screen, bathed in dark, swirling energy. The figure's face was concealed, but its voice carried a sense of cold authority. The fallen have come, and we will bring judgment upon all who oppose us. Your time is over, Arcturians. Prepare to witness your end. The words hit like a physical blow, and Drix's stomach tightened. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a declaration of war. The fallen were here, and they had no intention of negotiating. They had already made up their minds. The galaxy was about to change, and the Arcturian Empire was in their sights. Drix's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. They want war, but they don't understand. We are not weak. We will fight to the last. General, what do we do now? Commander Zhen asked, his voice laced with urgency. Drix turned to face his officers. We hold our ground, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Reinforcements will be here soon, but we can't rely on them. We have to find a way to fight back before it's too late. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, on the fringes of known space, a fleet of human warships moved silently through the vastness of the galaxy, far from the conflict that was unfolding. They were hidden in the dark corners of space, unrecognized by the major galactic empires. These ships, unlike anything seen before, were designed for one purpose: survival. And they had been waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right signal. Now, the signal had come. As the leader of the human fleet observed the distant stars, his eyes narrowed. The fallen were coming, and they had not forgotten their past mistakes. This time, humanity would not be caught off guard. This time, they would make sure the galaxy knew just how dangerous they were. Prepare the fleet, the leader said, his voice low and filled with purpose. It's time to remind the galaxy who we are. The tension in the Arcturian fleet was palpable. General Drix stood at the front of the bridge, eyes fixed on the eerie image of the fallen warship. It was no longer just a strange anomaly. It was an unstoppable force that had arrived to challenge everything the galaxy knew. The message had been clear. The fallen had come for war, and they would not stop until they had destroyed their enemies. General, the reinforcements are still hours away, Commander Zhen said, his voice tense. We can't afford to wait. The fallen might be planning something big. Drix nodded, his mind racing. There had to be something they could do. The Arcturian fleet, though powerful, was no match for the mysterious warship alone. And with the fallen's warning hanging over them, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Send out a general distress signal to the rest of the galaxy, Drix ordered. We need to alert every sector. Prepare for the worst, but we will not bow to them. Not without a fight. Aboard the fallen warship. Inside the warship, the eerie calm that had taken over earlier was now replaced by an almost palpable sense of anticipation. The fallen's leader stood before a darkened console, looking down at the projections of the Arcturian fleet. A low hum filled the room as the engines began to power up. The time has come, the leader said, voice calm but filled with cold purpose. We've waited long enough. Now we make them understand. A crew member stepped forward, her face hidden beneath the helmet, and activated the warship's weapon systems. The screens flickered with data, and a massive energy beam began to charge. The leader turned to the crew. "Prepare the fleet. The Arcturians will learn that their arrogance has cost them. The galaxy will know what happens when you forget your past." As the ship's weapon systems powered up, the fallen leader's cold eyes locked onto the Arcturian fleet. They had underestimated the fallen before, but now it was too late. The battle was inevitable. Back on the Arcturian flagship, General Drix's eyes widened as the sensors began to flash. The fallen warship was charging its weapons, preparing for something enormous. The Arcturians had never faced a weapon of this magnitude. The sheer scale of the energy buildup on the screen made Drix's stomach drop. "They're launching," shouted one of the officers. "Brace for impact." A single blinding beam shot out from the fallen warship. It moved so fast, it seemed like it materialized out of nowhere. The energy pulse slammed into the Arcturian flagship's shield, sending a shockwave through the entire ship. The lights flickered as alarms blared across the bridge. "We're hit," Commander Jen yelled, grabbing onto a nearby console to steady himself. "Shields are at 50% and falling." Drix gritted his teeth, his mind racing. If that beam had hit their hull, they would have been wiped out in an instant. But the shields were holding. Barely. "Return fire," Drix ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All weapons, full power." The Arcturian fleet opened fire, their cannons releasing a barrage of plasma bolts aimed at the fallen warship. The projectiles streaked through space, but the fallen ship's shields absorbed every hit. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. "General, their shields are impenetrable," one of the officers said, frustration lacing their voice. "We can't break through." Drix clenched his fists. They needed something more, something they didn't have yet, and they didn't have time to figure it out. "Commander, send out a message to the rest of the fleet," Drix said. "Tell them to focus fire on the weak points we've identified. We're not done yet." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, in the dark reaches of space, the hidden fleet of human warships had received the distress signal from the Arcturian flagship. Their leader, a veteran commander with years of combat experience, stood before the communications panel. The message was clear. An ancient, deadly force had arrived, and it was time for the galaxy to unite. But the human fleet was not bound by the alliances that governed other sectors. They had their own reasons for joining the fight. "Prepare to jump," the human commander said, his voice steady but filled with an edge of anticipation. "This galaxy is about to learn what happens when you push humanity too far." The fleet of human warships powered up their engines, the dark ships moving through space like shadows, unseen by the larger galactic powers. They were an unknown quantity, something that no one could predict, and they were about to make their presence known. Back at the front lines, the Arcturian fleet had begun to falter under the relentless assault from the fallen warship. Its beams of energy were cutting through their defenses, and the fleet was being pushed back. Ships were taking damage, and there was little hope for a counterattack. "General, the reinforcements from Viranth's sector are still hours away," Jen said, his voice filled with desperation. "We can't hold out much longer." Drix's eyes burned with determination. He wouldn't let his people fall without a fight. "Hold them off for as long as you can," Drix ordered. "We can't give up now. If we go down fighting." Suddenly, a new presence. Without warning, the sensors on the bridge began to ping, showing an anomaly. Something new had arrived. The crew scrambled to make sense of it. And then, with a blinding flash, the human warships appeared out of nowhere, flanking the Arcturian fleet. The human ships were unlike anything the Arcturians had seen before. Sleek, fast, and deadly, they moved with precision, their weapons striking the fallen warship with pinpoint accuracy. "What is this?" Jen exclaimed, his eyes wide with surprise. "Human warships. But how?" Before Drix could respond, a message came through from the human fleet's leader. "We heard your call for help. You're not alone." The battle had shifted. The fallen, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of humanity's forces, struggled to adjust. The combined power of the Arcturian and human fleets began to push back against the Fallen's overwhelming force. The battlefield was eerily quiet. The Fallen warship had pulled back, retreating into the darkness of space, but only for a moment. The brief lull gave the Arcturian and human fleets a moment to breathe. It was a fragile peace, one that wouldn't last long. The damage inflicted on both sides was severe, but the arrival of the human warships had tipped the balance, at least for now. General Drix stood on the bridge of the Arcturian flagship, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space ahead. The coordinates for the retreating Fallen warship flashed on the screens in front of him. The Fallen were regrouping, but the fact that they had retreated at all was a sign of weakness, a glimmer of hope. "This is only a temporary victory," Drix said, his voice low but determined. "They won't stay down for long. We need to push while they're disoriented. We need to strike first." Commander Zhen stepped forward, a holographic map of the sector in front of him. "We've lost several ships in this skirmish, and our remaining fleet is damaged. The Fallen won't hesitate to come at us with everything they have. Even with the humans at our side, we can't afford to take them lightly." Drix nodded. He knew the stakes. The Fallen had been a shadow in the galaxy for far too long. If they had truly returned in full force, they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. And with their superior technology, they would be difficult to stop. "We'll hold off the Fallen for as long as we can," Drix said firmly. "But our real advantage now lies in the humans. Their fleet is unlike anything we've seen before. If we can learn from them, maybe, just maybe, we can defeat the Fallen once and for all." Aboard the human warship, on the flagship of the human fleet, the commander stood before a large interactive map of the sector. His face was unreadable, a mix of experience and cold determination. His fleet had just engaged in its first major battle in years, and though they had succeeded in driving the Fallen back, the cost had been high. "We can't let our guard down," the human commander muttered to himself. "This is just the beginning." He turned to his officers, each one standing at attention. "This isn't a one-time skirmish. The Fallen have been waiting for this moment for centuries, and they're not going to stop just because we showed up. We need to prepare for what's coming next." One of his officers spoke up, looking at the commander with concern. "But sir, we've never faced an enemy like this before. They're ancient, powerful, and relentless. Are we really ready for what comes after?" The commander's gaze hardened. They thought humanity was weak, but now they know different. It's time to show them what happens when you push too far. Meanwhile, the Fallen warship. Deep within the Fallen warship, the dark figure of the leader paced before the main holographic control panel. The image of the retreating Arcturian and human fleets flickered on the screen. Their surprise counterattack had thrown off the Fallen strategy, but it wasn't enough to stop them. "They resist more than expected," the Fallen leader muttered. "But it is of no consequence. We will crush them, as we have crushed all who dare to oppose us." An officer stepped forward, voice tinged with urgency. "Leader, the human fleet. We've been observing their technology. Their ships are unlike anything we've encountered before. They move with a speed we can't match, and their weapons are precise." The Fallen leader paused, turning slowly to face the officer. "Then we will adapt. The humans have revealed their strength, but they have also shown their weaknesses. We will break them just as we have broken every other empire in this galaxy." The officer hesitated before speaking again. "What of the Arcturians, leader?" "They are weakened. Their fleet is injured." The Fallen leader's eyes glowed with a cold fire. "The Arcturians are useful for now. They know the layout of this galaxy. We will use them, but soon they will be expendable. The true target is humanity." Back on the Arcturian flagship, Drix paced the bridge, deep in thought. The Fallen were regrouping, and the humans were still a mystery. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had only seen the surface of what humanity was capable of. They had arrived with unorthodox tactics, throwing the Fallen into disarray. But could they keep up the fight? "General, we've intercepted more transmissions from the Fallen," one of the officers reported. "They're forming a new battle strategy. It looks like they're preparing to target the human fleet." Drix's heart sank. If the Fallen focused on the humans, they could easily wipe out the newly arrived fleet. It would leave the Arcturians with no allies, and that was a scenario they couldn't afford. "Alert the humans," Drix said, his voice urgent. "We need to work together to repel the Fallen before they make their move. I won't let them take you out." Aboard the human flagship. The message from the Arcturian fleet arrived as the human commander stood in the command center. His expression was unreadable as he listened to the warning. "We've already engaged the Fallen once, and they won't make the same mistake again," the commander said. "It's time to strike first." He turned to his crew. "Prepare the fleet. We're going on the offensive. We're going to hit them harder than they expect." The calm before the storm. The two fleets, Arcturian and human, stood united in the vast emptiness of space. The Fallen had underestimated them. But this time, there would be no retreat. The battle to decide the fate of the galaxy was about to reach its most crucial moment. The message was clear. They were not going to let the Fallen destroy them. The time for hiding was over. The galaxy would learn what happened when you pushed humanity and its allies too far. The galaxy had never witnessed such a battle. A combined force of Arcturian and human fleets stood united against the terrifying might of the Fallen. Every ship in their respective fleets was on high alert, the crews preparing for a war unlike any they had fought before. As they waited for the storm to break, General Drix and the human commander stood at the helm of their ships, staring into the vastness of space, where the Fallen warship lingered, silent, ominous, and waiting for its moment. On the Arcturian flagship, General Drix stood before the holographic map, his face drawn with determination. The coordinates of the Fallen fleet flickered on the screen, and the latest intelligence showed no movement, at least not yet. "We need to strike first," Drix muttered, his fingers tapping the console in frustration. "If they gather their forces for one final assault, it could be over before we even have a chance to fight back." Commander Zhen, who stood beside him, glanced at the screen. "The humans. They're ready to help us. But are we sure we're ready to push them this far?" Drix looked up, his eyes locked with Zhen's. "We have no choice. The Fallen won't stop until they've destroyed us all. If we don't act now, the galaxy may fall. We don't know when they'll strike again. And I won't take that chance." Zhen nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. "Prepare the fleet. We'll give them everything we've got." On the human flagship. Meanwhile, on the flagship of the human fleet, the commander paced the deck. His officers worked quickly around him, checking the weapon systems and preparing their ships for the worst. The tension in the air was thick as the human crew gathered for their final stand. "Commander," an officer reported, "we've received the message from the Arcturians. They're ready to move. We need to be in position before the Fallen retaliate." The commander nodded, a look of grim resolve on his face. "It's time. We've waited long enough. Our people have faced impossible odds before. And now, we fight for the future of the galaxy." He turned to his communications officer. "Send the signal. It's time to show the Fallen what happens when they underestimate humanity." The officer nodded and activated the comm system, sending out the signal to every ship in the human fleet. "All units, prepare for immediate engagement. We are not backing down." The Fallen warship. On board the Fallen warship, the leader stood before a massive console, observing the movements of the Arcturian and human fleets. Their ships were positioning themselves for a strike, and the Fallen leader's cold, emotionless gaze never left the screen. They had expected resistance, but what they saw now was a challenge. This battle would be harder than they had anticipated. "We've been patient," the Fallen leader said, his voice low, almost to himself. "But the time for patience is over." He turned to his crew. "Prepare the weapons. We will crush them all." His voice was a command, one filled with the promise of destruction. The Fallen had always believed they were the most powerful force in the galaxy. Now, they were about to face the combined might of two of its most formidable factions. The final assault. The battle began without warning. The sky was lit with bursts of energy as the Arcturian and human fleets launched their opening volleys, their weapons striking the fallen warship with full force. Explosions rocked the battlefield as plasma bolts collided with shields and hulls, sending shockwaves across the sector. Despite their combined strength, the fallen warship absorbed every hit. Its shields shimmered with an unnatural glow as it retaliated, sending beams of pure energy cascading across the battlefield. The Arcturian and human ships dodged and weaved, trying to find weaknesses in the enemy's defense. General Drix's voice rang out across the bridge. "Hold steady. Keep pushing forward. We can't stop now." The human commander's fleet was in sync, their ships moving with precision, each one firing as one unit. It was clear the humans had been waiting for this moment. Their battle tactics, honed through years of conflict, were proving invaluable. The Fallen were being pushed back, but the warship remained relentless. The two fleets were relentless in their pursuit of victory. Explosions filled space, their shockwaves threatening to tear apart entire ships. The Arcturian and human forces fought side by side, their unity giving them strength. The fallen leader had underestimated humanity's resolve. But the true test was yet to come. The turning point. In the heat of the battle, the unthinkable happened. The human flagship fired a massive concentrated energy blast, hitting a previously untested weak point on the fallen warship's hull. The explosion sent ripples through space, and the fallen warship's outer shields began to falter. The fallen leader, watching from his command post, snarled in frustration. "No, this cannot be. They cannot have discovered our weakness." As the shields flickered and the warship began to destabilize, the combined forces of the Arcturian and human fleets launched a final, coordinated strike. The overwhelming firepower hit the warship all at once, tearing through its weakened defenses and causing massive internal explosions. The aftermath. For a brief moment, the battlefield went silent. The once feared fallen warship now lay in ruins, its hulking remains floating in the void of space. The combined forces of the Arcturians and humans had done the unthinkable. They had destroyed the warship, shattering the Fallen's grip on the galaxy. General Drix stared at the wreckage on his screen, a feeling of disbelief washing over him. They had won. The human commander's voice came through the comms. "This victory is just the beginning. The Fallen thought they could control the galaxy, but they forgot one thing. Humanity is not to be underestimated."